In December 2023, Venezuela, under the rule of dictator Nicolas Maduro, held a controversial and widely criticized referendum to decide on the annexation of two-thirds of a neighboring, indisputably independent territory, the Essequibo region in Guyana. This initiative, orchestrated by a regime broadly regarded as authoritarian, sparked international outrage and raised serious concerns about its potential impact on South America's stability. Far from being a legitimate act, the referendum was a clear attempt by Maduro to consolidate internal power at the expense of a sovereign neighbor. Comparable in size to the U.S. state of Florida, the Essequibo is a resource-rich region with abundant oil reserves and other natural assets. This wealth makes the territory strategically significant and an attractive target for Maduro's government, which is grappling with a deep economic and political crisis. The referendum emerges as yet another desperate maneuver by the Venezuelan leader to secure resources and bolster his authority amid mounting domestic challenges. However, the referendum was marred by severe irregularities. Conducted exclusively among Venezuelan citizens, without consulting Guyana or the inhabitants of the Essequibo, it was widely condemned as a blatant violation of territorial sovereignty. Nations around the globe warned of the dangerous precedent this action sets, fearing it could pave the way for future conflicts not only in the region but elsewhere in the world. Maduro's decision to include the Essequibo in Venezuela's official maps is a provocative gesture that directly challenges international order. Far from seeking dialogue or a peaceful resolution, the Venezuelan government seems determined to use military measures to achieve its objectives. Just days after the referendum, the Venezuelan government declared a landslide victory, at least according to Nicolas Maduro, claiming that more than 10 million people voted, with 95% supporting the annexation of the Essequibo. However, these figures were quickly called into question. The international community and independent groups estimated that actual voter turnout did not exceed 2 million Venezuelans, pointing to potential data manipulation to legitimize the outcome. These discrepancies further highlight the lack of transparency in Maduro's regime and the undemocratic nature of his actions, a hallmark of his leadership dating back to his time as Hugo Chávez's successor. In a televised address, Maduro declared that the referendum's decision was final and irrevocable. He also ordered the publication of new official maps, including the Essequibo, as an integral part of Venezuela's territory. This blatantly provocative move was seen as an attempt to formalize on paper a claim over a region Venezuela has never actually controlled, flagrantly disregarding Guyana's sovereign rights. Domestically, the regime used this situation as a tool to reinforce its political grip. By framing the annexation of the Essequibo as a national triumph, Maduro sought to distract from Venezuela's dire economic and social crisis. This strategy aims to stoke nationalism and consolidate popular support for the regime, even at the cost of escalating regional tensions. However, the effectiveness of this approach is highly questionable, given that the majority of Venezuelans are struggling with extreme poverty and widespread hunger. Internationally, the reaction was almost unanimously condemnatory. Numerous countries and organizations, including the Organization of American States, OAS, labeled the move illegitimate and warned of the possible consequences should the situation escalate further. Despite these criticisms, Maduro remains defiant, challenging not only Guyana's sovereignty but also the fundamental principles of international law. One of the most controversial measures within Venezuela's potential annexation plans was the appointment of a Venezuelan general as governor of the region. This decision, besides symbolizing the government's absolute control over the claimed territory, suggests a militarized approach to the issue. The truth is that Venezuela has been emboldened by the expansion of BRICS, led by China. The organization has welcomed new member nations, many of them totalitarian regimes similar to Venezuela. Maduro feels strengthened by this development, perhaps even believing he will be supported in the event of a military conflict. Military activity near the border has already heightened regional instability. Venezuelan troops have been spotted near the Essequibo, and reports indicate the construction of airstrips and roads in the area. The decisions made by Maduro's government not only violate international norms but also suggest a strategic plan to make any future reversal difficult. By taking concrete actions in the territory, the regime seeks to create an irreversible reality, further increasing the risk of conflict in South America. For those unfamiliar, the Essequibo is a vast area in northern Amazonia, characterized by dense tropical forests, powerful rivers, and unique biodiversity. Despite its natural wealth, the region is sparsely populated, with an estimated population of only 128,000 people. This combination of low population density and vast territory makes the Essequibo a strategically and economically valuable space, especially in the context of geopolitical disputes. The wealth of the Essequibo extends beyond its lush forests. The region is rich in natural resources such as gold, bauxite, and, most importantly, oil. Recent discoveries of large offshore oil reserves near Guyana have increased the area's attractiveness, transforming the Essequibo into a valuable prize for any nation. For a government in crisis like Maduro's, control over these resources represents a potential solution to Venezuela's economic problems. Historically, the Essequibo has been overlooked in terms of development. The lack of infrastructure and investment reflects decades of territorial disputes that have hindered the exploitation of its economic potential. However, this began to change recently with oil exploration projects led by international companies, which have drawn even more attention to the region and intensified the conflict with Venezuela. Beyond its economic significance, the Essequibo holds symbolic importance for Guyana, forming an integral part of its national identity. For the Guyanese people, the territory represents sovereignty and territorial integrity, values now directly threatened by the Venezuelan government's actions. But anyone who thinks this conflict is recent would be mistaken. The dispute over the Essequibo is long-standing, dating back to the 19th century when Venezuela claimed the territory was illegally taken by the British Empire, then the colonizer of Guyana. The conflict's starting point was the so-called Paris Award of 1899, which defined the borders between Venezuela and British Guyana, assigning the Essequibo to British control. Since then, Caracas has rejected the validity of the agreement, labeling it an unjust act imposed by foreign powers. Throughout the 20th century, the dispute was marked by diplomatic tensions, with Venezuela frequently reaffirming its territorial claim. In 1966, the year Guyana gained independence, the Geneva Agreement was signed between the two countries and the United Kingdom to resolve the issue peacefully. However, negotiations never reached a definitive solution, and the Essequibo remained under Guyanese administration while Venezuela continued to assert its claim over the territory as part of its historical sovereignty. In recent years, the discovery of vast oil reserves off the Essequibo coast reignited Venezuela's interest in the region. Nicolas Maduro has used historical narratives to justify his recent actions, presenting the 2023 referendum as a legitimate step toward reclaiming what Caracas considers to be a usurped territory. However, this justification has been widely criticized as a manipulation of historical facts to serve the regime's political and economic interests. On the other hand, Guyana vehemently rejects Venezuela's claims, asserting that the Essequibo is an integral part of its territory. The Guyanese government argues that the borders established in 1899 are final and internationally recognized. Furthermore, Guyana has strengthened its ties with international partners, including major oil companies and multilateral organizations, to protect its sovereignty and deter any Venezuelan advances. The history of this dispute reveals that it is far more than just a territorial issue. It is a battle of narratives, where Venezuela attempts to rewrite historical facts to legitimize its actions. As the conflict evolves, the justifications from both sides will serve as weapons in the diplomatic arena and potentially in direct confrontations. During a controversial statement, Venezuela's Minister of Defense declared that the territorial dispute is not a war for now, implying that the possibility of armed conflict remains on the table. This aggressive rhetoric, combined with military movements near the border, has heightened tensions between the two nations, leaving Guyana on high alert. For Venezuela to solidify its annexation of the Essequibo, it would need to establish physical control over the territory, a move that would inevitably require a military incursion. However, the geography of the Essequibo presents a significant challenge. The region is covered in dense tropical forests and has limited infrastructure, complicating the mobilization of troops and heavy vehicles. This scenario makes any military operation a risky and logistically expensive endeavor. Despite these practical difficulties, Maduro's regime appears determined to use the Essequibo as a tool to inflame nationalist sentiment within Venezuela. By positioning troops near the border and investing in military infrastructure in the region, Caracas not only sends a message to Guyana but also tests the limits of the international community's tolerance. This strategy of intimidation, though risky, reflects the desperation of an isolated regime under immense domestic pressure. Meanwhile, Guyana has been working to strengthen its defenses, although its armed forces are significantly smaller and less equipped than Venezuela's. Guyana's reliance on international support, both military and diplomatic, will be crucial in deterring a potential Venezuelan invasion. On the international stage, the initial reaction has been one of strong disapproval. Organizations like the United Nations and the Organization of American States, OAS, have expressed concern over the escalating tensions, calling for respect for international law and Guyana's sovereignty. However, beyond public statements, concrete actions to pressure Venezuela have yet to materialize. This hesitance has drawn criticism, with some suggesting that the international community might be underestimating the crisis's severity and its potential to destabilize the region. Some countries, particularly those with direct interests in Guyana's oil resources, have begun to show greater involvement. Nations such as the United States and the United Kingdom have expressed support for Guyana, emphasizing that any attempt at invasion or annexation will be treated as a threat to regional stability. Additionally, oil companies operating in the Essequibo have intensified calls for foreign governments to ensure the security of their activities. Despite these displays of solidarity, Guyana faces the challenge of mobilizing broader and more decisive support. A lack of coordinated and effective action could embolden Maduro to continue his provocative maneuvers, increasing the risk of direct confrontation. Following the 2023 referendum, Nicolas Maduro's government launched several strategies to legitimize its claim over the Essequibo and consolidate control of the region. Among these initiatives was the offer of Venezuelan citizenship and identification documents to residents of the annexed territory. This maneuver aims not only to build internal support but also to frame the annexation as a humanitarian act, providing rights and benefits that residents allegedly lack under Guyana's government. Additionally, Caracas has begun implementing infrastructure projects in the region, including the construction of roads and airstrips, even in areas under Guyanese administration. These developments serve a dual purpose: facilitating the movement of Venezuelan troops and symbolizing the government's presence in the territory. International observers note that such actions are typical of a fait accompli strategy, where the occupying power attempts to make annexation irreversible through practical interventions. On the political front, Venezuela has intensified its propaganda campaign, both domestically and internationally. Inside the country, Maduro presents the annexation as a historic triumph, appealing to nationalist sentiments to distract the population from internal crises. Abroad, Caracas seeks support from strategic allies like Russia and Iran to bolster its position on the global stage. This alliance with anti-Western powers is a growing concern for the United States and other nations, which view the dispute as part of a broader geopolitical struggle. Military movements remain a cornerstone of Venezuela's strategy. Troops stationed near the border, coupled with military exercises, send a clear message that the government is willing to use force if necessary. This aggressive approach aims to intimidate Guyana and pressure the international community into accepting the annexation as a fait accompli. However, these actions risk backfiring, increasing regional and global resistance to Maduro's ambitions. The reality is that the crisis surrounding Venezuela's attempt to annex the Essequibo marks a turning point for South American geopolitics. If the annexation succeeds, it could trigger a cascade of devastating consequences for regional stability, beginning with the erosion of the principles of sovereignty and respect for international borders, cornerstones of South American relations. The Essequibo's wealth in natural resources adds another layer of complexity to the conflict. Oil and other minerals have attracted the interest of global powers, turning the territory into a battleground for economic and strategic competition. Additionally, Nicolas Maduro's actions set a dangerous precedent that could inspire other authoritarian governments to challenge international norms in pursuit of territorial or political gains. The international community faces the challenge of responding effectively to this crisis. A weak or delayed response might not only embolden Maduro but also undermine multilateral institutions like the United Nations and the OAS. On the other hand, a more direct intervention, whether through sanctions or military support for Guyana, risks escalating the conflict and drawing in additional external actors. Meanwhile, the people of the Essequibo, already historically neglected, risk becoming the greatest victims of this dispute. The uncertainty surrounding their political and economic future, coupled with the region's militarization, creates a scenario of vulnerability and insecurity. Now it remains to monitor the developments of this crisis and hope for diplomatic solutions capable of preventing a conflict that could resonate far beyond the borders of Guyana and Venezuela. And to stay updated, you can only do so by subscribing here to the channel. We've got another documentary ready for you to watch. Click on the screen, and we'll see you there.